So nice to see so many people on your videos, as well as putting your information in the chat, names, locations, associations. We'd encourage you to just do that for a couple more minutes as we give people a few extra to arrive. And we note that we've chosen a meeting format rather than a webinar format. We hope that this will be a bit of a networking opportunity and a chance to see who else is ready to act for peace and to gain a sense of solidarity and momentum from our presence together this afternoon. So I'd invite you to put your videos on if you're comfortable, to put your name on your screen. And if you, if it isn't your name or it's not a clear name, you might want to change that by going to the 3 dots above your picture. And you might consider adding your pronoun preference to your picture. That is a practice that more and more people are using to be inclusive and welcoming to those who are gender non-binary or trans folks. So if you see that, that's why people have put their pronouns up there. We are now at 5 minutes past the hour, and I'd like to formally welcome you to the Blue Scarf Peace Day online rally, Act for Peace. And I'll ask Rachel Small to open with a land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see such a great crowd gathered, and I'm thrilled that today we're actually gathering together as people living all around the world. I know many in this area, many in Canada, but I'm also seeing people from all over, and it's an honor to be together today. Those of us who are hosting this event do so from Turtle Island into Toronto, place you've probably heard referred to as Toronto, Canada. Toronto sits on the traditional and current territories of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's land that is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. So that's an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee confederacies, as well as allied nations, to peaceably share and care for all of the land around the Great Lakes, and to take care of all the people on that land as well. While this remains the land of the law of this land to this day, I would say, and many of us echo, that it is on all of us who in any way benefit from the existence of the Canadian state to not only acknowledge whose territory we stand on, but also to act and to call out our governments for never having honored these laws, for continuing, as we know, to act with violence instead of with peace, and for willfully and meticulously destroying this land instead of caring for it as the covenant demands. This event today is centered on the struggles, of course, against militarism, to mark International Peace Day, and also for climate justice. And so it's important that we begin today by recognizing that so much of what the Canadian military does within Canada continues the violent colonization of this land, as well as the climate crisis, whether that's through their surveillance of climate activists, through militarized policing right here in Toronto, or through military violence to suppress Indigenous land defenders who are attempting to stop pipeline construction on their land. We'll talk more about these struggles later, but these struggles are all interconnected. And here in so-called Canada, we know we can't fight the climate crisis or act for true peace without also taking a stand against the ongoing colonization of this land. And for those who are joining us today from further away or from outside of Turtle Island, I would invite you to consider where you stand right now and what is the history of that place, who has been removed from that land, and who is protecting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Just a couple of introductions and notes at the very beginning, some logistics. Rachel Small and Greta Zaro from World Beyond War are doing the technical aspects of our afternoon today. So if you have any trouble, you can send them a note in the chat, and they will be seeing that this all goes as smoothly as possible. So thank you to them and to that contribution. There are many organizations involved here, and you'll hear from several of us throughout the afternoon. I want to extend my personal welcome to each and every one of you to this rally. My name is Shannon Neufeld. I'm associated with Kairos and with Camp Micah, and privileged to work with a fine team from many organizations. This online rally, as Rachel alluded to, has grown out of in-person rallies and walks in Toronto, where we could wear our blue scarves out in public downtown in the city, carry massive blue banners. That's where the picture in our promotions came from, and invite others into the movement. Today, I want to ask Father Bob Holmes to tell us a little bit more about the Blue Scarf movement. Father Bob is a Catholic priest, coordinator of the Basilian Center for Peace and Justice, and is active in several of the sponsoring organizations you will be hearing from today. He has recently, in the last couple of years, had the opportunity to visit Kabul in Afghanistan to meet the young Afghan peace volunteers who began this movement known as the Blue Scarf movement. Father Bob.
Well, thanks, Shannon, and welcome everybody. And I do want to introduce you to the movement. And I did, in 2017, get invited to spend a week in Kabul with the Afghan peace volunteers. And I'm going to show you what it looks like a little bit. And if Rachel can get it up there on the screen. I can't see it, can you?
We'll just give her a minute. Sometimes this screen sharing takes a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Again, you might take a look at the chat where people have been introducing themselves, and you could do the same when you have a moment to introduce yourself to the group. I see.
I'll talk a little bit while we're waiting for it to come up on the screen. And the Afghan peace volunteers are young people in Afghanistan, in Kabul. They live in a war zone, and yet they have decided that war is just the last thing in the world that is good for anything, for them in Kabul, but for everybody on the whole planet. And so they began to wear these blue scarves and call for an end to all of the war that's going on all across the whole planet. And they're brave because they're living in a war zone, and it's really dangerous. And in fact, I was told never to walk out by myself when I was with them. I always had to be accompanied because it was dangerous. And even while I was there, there was a suicide bomber about 3 blocks from us, and about 7 or 8 people were killed. So it's amazing what I learned from them. Rachel, were you able to get that up there?
I'm sorry, it is coming. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Fine, 5 minutes ago, but this is how it goes.
Okay. Well, I'm really happy that we're able to show it to them. So, here we go. So it is about the Afghan peace volunteers. But when I first got there, the people I met at the airport, and that's the next one here, and that young lady in the center, her name is Zarguna, and she was wonderful. And we can blow it up there. Hit one more. And you see on her hand, she's got the word enough written there. And that's really what they're always saying. They're wearing these blue scarves and they're saying enough. And so we go to the next one. And when I got to the center where they were, the person who started it all, Hakim, Dr. Hakim, he showed me these two paintings on the wall of the building. And the one says, enough, and these young children are being weighed down by these bricks. And then in the other one, somebody's carrying these two pails, and there's three words on each of them. One said in Dari and one in Pashtun. And under enough it says, next one, enough war. We have to work for non-violent world. Enough inequality. We have to work for equality. Enough global warming. We have to work for a green planet. So he says, this is what we're working for. Okay, next. And the blue scarf is really important to them. They put them out, and notice it says border free on there. And what they're really saying is that we need to, push the next one, that all humans must live free and equal under one blue sky. So, next. I spent some time with Hakim, and he told me there are 6 building blocks on which the Afghan peace volunteers are built. And here's the first one. Become a border-free family. And they really believe in that. The borders are what's keeping us apart. We have to come together. And the second one is developing an egalitarian self-government. You know, even though he founded this group, he doesn't run it. He's not the director. They run it. And the third building block, adopting shared values like nonviolence. Those are the building blocks. And another one, building a cooperative economy. The economy we got now that's built by corporations to make profit, they aren't helping everybody. And of course, a world without war. And finally, the last one. Restoring our relationship to, go ahead, one more. To the environment, to nature. So those are the building blocks he works on. And the next slide shows you their mission statement. And so this is a picture of them taken just recently. And these Afghan peace volunteers, their mission is to seek to nurture nonviolent relationships and alternative ways to build a green and equal world without war. And they have started a worldwide movement. And here in Toronto, the next slide, we have picked up that blue scarf movement. And we are trying to build a border-free world without war under one blue sky. So right now, all of us are part of it. No matter where you are, we ask you to get your blue scarf or your blue whatever and then make it obvious. And Rachel's going to take a picture, probably several pictures to get the screenshots, eh? So we'll sit quietly and with our blue scarves on. Okay, Rachel, take it away.
There's quite a lot of us here, so I am going to take a few photos. So I'm going to ask you to just keep your scarf up and keep smiling. I don't know if you can hear the camera clicks, but there's so many of us, I'm going to need to take a few more. That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, Shannon.
Actually, I'm going to pass it on to Rosemary from Pax Christi. Rosemary, would you like to introduce yourself and our next guest speaker? But first, Rosemary, unmute yourself, please.
There, is that okay? Okay, it's great to be here, everybody, rallying together for peace. I'm very, very pleased and excited to introduce our first speaker, a young indigenous woman, Sophia Sidarou. Now, Sophia is an indigenous rights and environmental activist. Her activism has brought her traveling throughout Canada and even on the international stage at the UN headquarters for the International Day of the Girl at the Speak Out event. She explained the importance of the land and Mother Earth in relation to Indigenous women and girls. She is also one of the 15 plaintiffs suing the Canadian government for inaction on the climate crisis. Welcome, Sophia.
Hi, welcome. Nice to be here. So I'll just introduce myself in my language, which is Mi'kmaq. So Ninda Luisi Sophia Achnigen Boguero Hatnug Madapanagia Glewe. My name is Sophia and I come from Madapanagia First Nation. I'm 18 years old and I'm currently at the University of Ottawa studying conflict studies and human rights with a minor in environmental studies.
I love your earrings, Sophia. They are exemplifying, you're sharing your culture with us. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Now,
for
Sophia, you're welcome. And Sophia, I'd like to ask you the first question. I'll ask you two, but the first question I'd like to ask you is, you've joined with 14 other youth to file a lawsuit against the Canadian government for contributing to climate change. We'd love to hear more about that, as well as about your participation in the broader climate movement and how that connects with other struggles you and your communities are engaged in.
Yeah, so the climate lawsuit is a pretty groundbreaking lawsuit. So 14 other youth across Canada, as well as I, have gathered with support from our lawyers to sue the federal government over their inaction and action on climate change. It is also bringing forth the responsibility that the government has to, progressing the agenda that climate change is not an important issue and that youth are disposable in this situation. So we are holding the government accountable for their actions and what their role is in the climate crisis. Each of the litigants have a story, and it is written in their affidavits how they're impacted personally by climate change. I'm one of these plaintiffs, so I have also been personally impacted by the climate crisis, and many of us have already seen the drastic changes just through our short lives. So it's really important that the government takes this seriously and that the courts take this lawsuit seriously. So we're also bringing forth too that Section 7, our right to life, liberty, and security, is under threat because we don't have the luxury to live like past generations, that we are disproportionately affected by what is going on, and during this climate crisis, how we are impacted by the ongoing decisions and policies that are being passed through our governments. And what I like about this lawsuit as well is that it kind of brings forth that we have missed all targets on the climate crisis, no matter what government we've had. So this isn't just targeting the Liberal Party. This is really targeting all governments that we have had. It's not subject to just one party. This is a systematic issue that we are not taking action on the climate crisis, and that, youth are being drastically impacted, and that we need to take immediate action if we want to see our youth succeed and to live.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Most of us don't often think of how climate change is impacting us individually. Where can we learn more about the stories of each of the youth involved in this and learn more about what we can do?
So the David Suzuki Foundation is one of our founders on this lawsuit that bring in really important aspects of climate change. So we're also featured on the David Suzuki website. You can find each of the plaintiffs there and their story. Also, if you look up the lawsuit itself, you can see the formal affidavit submitted to the courts, and you can read through it. It is a heavy read, but you know, if you want to take the time to do that, you can. But I think the quicker read is on the David Suzuki Foundation. There's also plenty of places to donate to this lawsuit for our legal fees. And generally in the climate movement, there's lots and lots and lots of support and resources to get educated on the climate crisis. Some of my favorites are the David Suzuki Foundation and Greenpeace, and that's more locally in our so-called Canada region. And you could probably find certain chapters in your communities. So I know most of you are probably from the Toronto area. And I know that there are chapters of Fridays for Future strikes and youth grassroots movements that are, you know, leading the way into education for older generations and younger generations to get informed on the climate crisis and what they can do to take action.
Wonderful. So I, for one, look forward to learning more at the David Suzuki Foundation, as you have suggested, and also through Greenpeace and Fridays for Future. Thank you, Sophia. I'd like to ask you now a second question. Tomorrow is International Peace Day, September 21st, United Nations International Peace Day. What does working for peace look like for you and your communities?
Mm-hmm. So I also wear kind of two hats, I would say. So one would be as a Canadian plaintiff in this lawsuit. And I have faith that the courts will act in good faith for our lawsuit and take the youth's demands seriously on climate change. However, I'm also an Indigenous rights activist, and I have traveled to many places across Turtle Island to, you know, connect with youth and connect with the frontline communities that are on the front lines of climate change and genocide that is being inflicted on Indigenous peoples. And I think a really important thing to understand, and I've gotten many questions over the years about this, is that what do you mean when you use the word genocide? And I do mean to use this word genocide. You know, I have researched the term by UN standards and, you know, war standards and different levels of conflict, armed conflict, non-violent conflict, etc. But the Canadian government has actually acknowledged that they are inflicting genocide on Indigenous women and two-spirited peoples in Canada through their inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So if you read that report, it will tell you that the Canadian government has, you know, acknowledged that this is ongoing genocide against Indigenous peoples. And how that impacts people in communities is drastic, you know, beyond words. You see Indigenous women on the front lines of extractive resource projects. You see Indigenous girls that are fighting for their life because of the man camps that come onto Indigenous territories, which are primarily non-Indigenous workers, there to rape the land and to rape the women. So, you know, these are not light issues. And we see it constantly over and over again in so-called Canada and in the States and all across the world, actually. You know, I was thinking as Priest Bob was talking, how the similarities in Afghanistan are to Canada. And you wouldn't think that about a democratic state, but the truth is we are under war. We are under colonial violence. And the way to progress and to, you know, find a way to have peace in such dire circumstances when there is ongoing genocide against Indigenous peoples is to act for peace. And you might ask yourself, well, how do I do that? It seems like such a large concept, you know, it's such a large issue that intersects with climate change, it intersects with gender and sexuality, it intersects with poverty, it intersects with low quality of life and low quality of water and the, you know, inaccessibility to education, you know, basic things that we take for granted in this democracy that we have, and Indigenous peoples are treated as third world or subhuman or, you know, some type of thing that we see enshrined in the Indian Act. And it's really important to understand these issues before we talk about peace, because, you know, when we have truth and reconciliation, and what that really means is you need to have the truth before you can reconcile. And if you're not telling the truth about what we're doing in this country right now, then we can't have reconciliation if you're not telling the truth. So that's a problem that we have to face in our colonial governments, is that most of the leaders are not telling the truth. And a lot of Indigenous leaders that have signed on to extraction projects don't have the choice but to remain silent because of the non-disclosure agreements that they have signed. And they have to convince other Indigenous peoples that this is a good project that will bring in revenue for their communities, when in reality, this is only going to bring in problems. And when there will be a spill, you can almost count on the fact that the Canadian government is not going to help Indigenous peoples when that happens, or a very late response. So how do we get peace out of all of this? Like I said, you need the truth first, and then you can start connecting yourself to frontline communities. I think that's the most important part of the fight, is to go to where the issue is. You know, there's a lot of people that will talk about the issues, and that's great, but not all of them have the very direct and focal information that you will need in order to support properly. And there are a lot of places that you can donate to frontline Indigenous communities, and there are lots of resources to be allies and to support the fight for Indigenous sovereignty and for taking that land back and to reclaiming power for Indigenous peoples on this land. I think that's really important, to just even have conversations in your own circles. You know, I know lots of people that talk about the climate movement and the climate change and how they're impacted and how it frightens them to see, you know, the fire tornadoes and the whole West Coast going on fire, for example, you know. So in that conversation, we also need to bring up the Indigenous peoples that live on the West Coast. How are they coping with things? Because I haven't heard anything about them, and I can tell you that they're not coping very well, and that their support systems are not strong because of the genocide that has been going on. And of course, they're the frontline communities against climate change and genocide. So if we focus our attention and funds on those communities, we can help them to stay afloat in all of this chaos. And we can also help, you know, support them in the larger Indigenous sovereignty and climate justice movement that is currently happening. And I think it's beautiful, and that gives me hope, is when I see lots of non-Indigenous peoples that are joining the fight for Indigenous sovereignty. You know, that really, it gives me such a warm heart when I see that, and I see it often. I organize locally in Ottawa, and I shut down Ottawa for the Wet'suwet'en crisis among with other organizers, and I saw lots of non-Indigenous people show up for us, and it gave us security as well in the eyes of the government. But it also made us a threat that non-Indigenous peoples are joining our fight for sovereignty. That made them scared, and that's exactly what we need to happen. You know, that's exactly what needs to continue to happen, is non-Indigenous peoples joining us and showing one unified front, that we will not be divided, and that we're going to continue to fight until we get our destination, which is peace.
Thank you so much, Sophia. All of that is so helpful. And we are seeing that Indigenous peoples like yourselves are leading the way, and it's up to us to stand with you and support you and join the fight. Thank you so much.
Well,
I'm going to pass it back now to Shannon.
Or Rachel.
Or Rachel.
Thanks, Rosemary, and thank you so much, Sophia, for frankly speaking truth to power and doing it so powerfully and with such heart. We did not call this a rally just figuratively. As Shannon has alluded, this would normally be an in-person action that we would do. Now it's online, but we still wanted to have this be a rally in terms of taking real action as part of this event. So what we've done is we've set aside a small chunk of time after each speaker where we will try to act collectively on the issues they're raising and take even just one small step towards towards justice, towards reaching our destination, as Sophia put it. In talking about the issues that Sophia raised, we discussed what would be the most impactful action that people can do right now. And Sophia felt, and we all agreed, that frankly, resource distribution is what is most needed right now at the front lines of these struggles for climate justice and against colonization and genocide. People are risking their lives and their livelihoods and everything to really stop the climate crisis at its source, whether that's stopping a pipeline. I'll let her speak a little bit more to it, but we are going to invite everyone to, if they are able to, donate to some of these struggles. Let's see if I can share the correct presentation this time with some information as we do this. So if this were an in-person rally, this is the point where we would be passing a hat around and asking for you to give what you can to these frontline struggles. I'll pass it back to Sophia to just very briefly tell us about each of these three front lines and just very quickly what's happening there and why you may consider donating what you can. If for technological reasons you're not able to go to these links right now, which will also be included in the chat, we will also send them out after the event so that you can visit them and donate. But for now, I'll pass it to Sophia to briefly share about these three struggles.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. So to donate to the climate justice frontlines, we have three here. There are notably more than just these three, but I just wanted to focus the attention on these three, and I think that it's important that we keep our eyes to the front lines. So the first one is the Tiny House Warriors, and it is a group of local people in British Columbia and Blue River, and they are opposing the Trans Mountain Extension Project. So that's the link to their website, and if you click there, it will bring you to you know, their struggle and what they're doing to stop it. And currently they have tiny houses along the path of the pipeline. So it is direct action, and they are putting their lives in direct threat as we speak. So there have been lots of white supremacy counter protests that have happened directly at their camps. There can be lots of RCMP tactical tactics and military tactics that happen on the ground as well. So again, this is direct action, and they really need as much support as they can get. The second one is legal fees for frontlines in BC. It's the Raven Trust. And Raven's Trust is also a very good one to donate to. They support the Unistoten struggles against the CGL pipeline. They support the Tiny House Warriors and the TMX pipeline. And they also support other frontlines in BC that are dealing with legal fees and various legal affairs. So that's another good one. And then the last one I have here is the Unistoten camp. And that's the link to the Unistoten camp that will again bring you to the information of what they're about and what they have been doing. And that's mostly known as the Wet'suwet'en crisis, where RCMP have raided it 3 times now and have arrested matriarchs on their own lands for the sake of the CGL pipeline that hereditary chiefs had said no to. So that's that link. And again, if you keep up to date with the updates of the front lines, you can see when they really need help, and they'll put a call out for support and solidarity actions. And yeah, that's about it.
So I'll talk just for a minute more to give people a chance to throw whatever they would throw into a hat if we were passing it around right now into maybe one of those links. These, of course, are in some ways specific to Turtle Island, or specifically to the West Coast, which, as Sophia mentioned, is literally on fire right now. However, these are the front lines of the climate crisis for the world. Like, if these pipelines that people are literally building tiny houses in the way of, linking their arms and standing in the way of, if these pipelines are built, they will result directly in the extraction of oil that will put us past 2 degrees Celsius. Like, we cannot actually have these pipelines and have a livable planet for future generations. So these are front lines for the whole world. And there are other climate justice front lines wherever you live. And I really appreciate Sophia's suggestion that we learn about them. And as much as possible, if we can, we bring our bodies there to support directly. If you were not able to both still be in this webinar and go to these links, as I mentioned, we will send them out later. You can also click on them directly in the chat where they've been posted. But I'm very eager for us to hear from our second speaker. So at this point, I will pass the mic over to Mary Ellen.
Have we lost Mary Ellen? Mary Ellen was going to introduce our...
No. Okay, I'm here now. I couldn't get it unmuted.
Excellent.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you very much, Sophia. I appreciate all that you shared. Now, on my part, I'm Mary Ellen Francard, and I'm representing today Pax Christi Toronto. And it is my great honor to welcome to our gathering Senator Douglas Roche as a speaker here on this occasion. Now, many of us may know Douglas Roche very well, but I wish to offer some of his life, which makes him so appropriate for our rally today. Senator Roche is a Canadian author, former parliamentarian, and then senator in the government of Canada, diplomat, and passionate activist for peace and human security issues. He served as a progressive conservative member of parliament for the city of Edmonton, Alberta, from 1972 to 1984. And during those years, he became very aware of the great need for disarmament, and particularly nuclear disarmament, to bring about world peace. He began to work very actively in these areas, and in 1984, he was appointed Canadian Ambassador for Disarmament at the United Nations. In 1988, he was elected chairman of the United Nations Disarmament Committee. And when the position as ambassador came to an end in 1989, he continued to be very active and creative as movement toward nuclear disarmament became stalled by nuclear weapon states. So he founded and ultimately was chairman emeritus of the Middle Powers Initiative. And in that, he traveled the world to non-nuclear countries, building relationships among them to work together for disarmament. His work continued as he was appointed to the Senate, where he served from 1998 to 2004. He's a member of several organizations advocating for nuclear disarmament. He was honored as an Officer of the Order of Canada for all this work. And then, building on this honor, he became one of the founding members of the group Canadians for a Nuclear Weapons Convention, where all, now up to, I think, over 800 persons, are recipients of the Order of Canada. And in 2010, the city of Hiroshima named him an honorary citizen. When not on the road as a diplomat and speaker, he has authored 22 books and has contributed chapters to 20 other books. And articles seem to pour out of him, and I'm no longer surprised to learn of yet another article appearing. He has written a book called The Human Right to Peace, where he describes how the world can and must move from the present culture of war to a culture of peace. Personally, Senator Roach has been an inspiration and teacher to me, and his gift of holding on to a spirit of optimism and hope is a source of strength for me and for so many. So welcome, Douglas Roche.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen, and congratulations to you and all your colleagues for this wonderful meeting, the way we're doing this electronically. And I want to tell you at the beginning, I'm wearing a blue shirt and a blue tie, so I hope that this contributes to the spirit
Absolutely.
of the blue scarves.
Absolutely.
Mary Ellen?
I'm just going to start, Doug, by setting you off with a question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to us about the world's moving toward a culture of peace and how disarmament contributes to that?
Yes. Well, we begin by picking up where Sophia left off. She talked about the effects of the climate disasters that are having on indigenous people and the surroundings. This is all part of a triple emergency that the world is now facing. The storms, the floods, the fires that are in the television news all the time make it abundantly clear that the effects of climate change now are upon us. It's not something for the future, but we're living through it now. The migrations of peoples to safer lands has already started and is going to become chaotic in the near future. So the climate change issue is the first of these emergencies. The second is the piling up of nuclear weapons. There are now more than 14,000 nuclear weapons in the world held by 9 countries, and they are all modernizing them, making them even more dangerous as we go forward. And if states were getting along and the major powers like the United States, Russia, and China were all cooperating with each other, and say, well, maybe we can live with this. But they are not cooperating. They are confronting one another and threatening one another and continuing the policy of nuclear deterrence, by which they keep piling up nuclear weapons through modernization programs that will cost $1 trillion over the next decade. So this is an emergency for humanity when we consider the effect of weapons of mass destruction. And this impacts on the third emergency that we're facing, which is the coronavirus, COVID-19. It's hard to describe how catastrophic this is for millions upon millions of people in the world who have lost their health, their lives, their health, their jobs, their opportunities, their housing. And as Bill Gates, the head of the Gates Foundation, said in his report just this week, that this has had such a calamitous effect on the vulnerable people in the less developed countries that we have lost over the past 25 weeks, going back to the beginning of March, we've lost 25 years of development process. So this is a triple emergency that we need to take hold of and recognize that we cannot go on with the same kind of government policies that promote militarism, the spending of money. Later on, I'd like to say a few words about the Canadian defense budget and when we get into some details. But I just want to say at this time that we must recognize the effect of this triple emergency. Now, against that, we have had over the past 2 or 3 decades the beginnings of the development of a culture of peace. Even though there are still wars, there is still confrontation, there is developing a conscience of humanity that is rejecting war. We saw that, for example, in 2003, when 200 million people around the world marched against the impending war of the United States was going to wage on Iraq. That's a beginning of a manifestation of how a culture of peace is getting into our consciousness. This is because our consciences are being formed, that we, under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, how we now treat one another in the world, and of course now how we are going to treat the planet. So there is an elevation of humanity that is taking place despite these tremendous difficulties that the triple emergency have presented to us. We cannot lose sight, we cannot lose faith, and we cannot lose heart that we have the ability to move forward as a human civilization, and millions upon millions upon millions of people are doing that in the civil society organizations that they belong to, whether it's in sustainable development, environmental protection, the advancement of human rights, arms control and disarmament. It would take a long time to describe how much work is being done in what I would call an age of enlightenment, and which is now buttressed by our ability to communicate. And the digital revolution, we are taking part in that at this very moment in having this conference the way we are electronically. The power of the digital revolution in bringing humanity together, it's showing how we can be much more reflective of ourselves as one human family. Now, it is true, we still have our divides, racial, religious, all those divides are still there. But the advanced people, I'd say 30 to 40% perhaps, of humanity as a whole, the advanced people are recognizing that we have to move from the old culture of war, which in the 20th century brought us 2 world wars and 100 million people killed. We have to move from the old culture of war to a culture of peace. And what is the heart of a culture of peace? The heart of it is non-violence. Non-violence against a person physically, and non-violence against a person economically and socially, non-violence and discrimination. In other words, more equality. We see horrendously the inequalities, the inequities that are still present in the world. But there is a reaction against that. That reaction, which we've seen in demonstrations this summer on the Black Lives Matter. It's very much part of a culture of peace. So I would say that without diminishing for one moment how serious this triple emergency is for humanity, that we do have the resources and we have the will, we have increasing understanding. And I say, I'm encouraging people everywhere to participate in this by the simple act of raising their voices, whether it's in mail, letters, correspondence, communication to members of parliament, to raise our voice that we want government priorities to be focused on the advancement of human life and the protection of a culture of peace, rather than more money for more militarism.
Thank you. You make that very, very clear. And I know that your life has been so dedicated to that, and that disarmament is very much part of that demilitarization. And really, as Sophia said, decolonization, because the militarism is so attached to colonization. Could you maybe just briefly, Douglas, say a little bit about the close connection between, let's say, nuclear weapons and climate change? Just briefly, because I know there's an intimate connection.
The climate change and nuclear weapons, now with COVID, as I say, a third emergency, but those two, climate and nuclear, are the two paramount issues that have been affecting the world now for a number of years. And they are interconnected, because the very idea of using a nuclear weapon anywhere would be so destructive of the environment and bring us all, famines, nuclear winter, and so on. So I'd like to say a word here about the United Nations and what it is doing to come up on top of these problems. We have to recognize that here is the UN now on the 75th anniversary. They're having their major observance of it starting tomorrow in the next couple of days, and by virtual meetings around the world. And the United Nations has been the focal point for the Paris Agreement, which brought 193 states together to try to raise the standards that would replace carbon emissions in the atmosphere. And the United Nations has been the place where governments have gathered to put in nuclear disarmament steps. And both of those fields, the climate and the nuclear, need to be greatly pushed forward by governments, and governments themselves need to be pushed by the advanced wing of civil society. That brings us right to here in our moment. So we are not at the United Nations this moment, but we are part of the United Nations, because we are advancing the core ideas that are at the culture of peace. So by climate and the nuclear, we help to advance the culture of peace and change the priorities of government spending.
Right. So since our action actually is going to be pertaining to nuclear weapons, could you just tell us briefly about the campaign to urge all countries, certainly including Canada, to sign and ratify the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons?
Yes, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was signed by 122 states in 2017. It needs 50 to be ratified, and there have been in order for it to enter into force. So far, 44 states have ratified it, and so shortly it will enter into force. But I'm very sad to say that Canada has not been a supporting country, because all the NATO states have rejected it, because the United States, Britain, and France led the opposition to these negotiations. I mean, can you imagine that these states that consider themselves so advanced in thinking are opposing a treaty that bans the possession of nuclear weapons. Why are they doing this? Because they're living still under nuclear deterrence, and the idea that I, as one state, have to have more nuclear weapons than you, and you then I'll come back to say, well, you have to have more than me, and this gives the nuclear arms race. And we're living through a renewed nuclear arms race now. And it's precisely because the major states have ignored their obligations, their legal obligations under Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty that is now this year 50 years old. I repeat, they have ignored their obligations that spurred these other states around the world to create this new treaty called a Prohibition Treaty. And it is absolutely inexcusable that the government of Canada has turned its back on this treaty. And so one action that we can certainly do is to raise our voices in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Thank you very much. And that's exactly what we intend to do today. And also for all the participants who are not in Canada, this is a worldwide movement. And so we'll give some information about how they can be doing that for their own countries. So Douglas, I just thank you so much for all that you've shared, and once again, sharing your hope and the positive reality that humanity is growing in consciousness. We have what we need to move into a culture of peace, and together we can do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'll pass this back now to either Rachel or Shannon.
Yes, we're going to do this together. I believe Rachel has a slide for us. So in addition to what you saw in the chat, if you're on the chat as well, there's been comments about the amount of money spent on militarism, and a link there about the Canadian plan to buy new fighter jets that would carry nuclear weapons. And so there was a link there. But what we had chosen as our primary action for this afternoon was this link that is on the slide, as well as if someone is able to put it into the chat, that makes it a little easier to click on. For those in Canada or those outside of Canada who want to speak to the Canadian Prime Minister, this is a very short message, very clear, and in concert with a local survivor of atomic weapons, Setsuko Thurlow, and urging the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, to acknowledge Canada's contribution to building the first atom bombs, to express regret for the deaths and suffering already caused, and to sign the United Nations Nuclear Ban Treaty, as it is known. There's space there for you to add a comment, make it personal if you can, tell the Prime Minister why you are concerned, and then just enter your contact information and it will be sent automatically to the Prime Minister's office. For those outside Canada, the ICANN website is listed there, and you can check out that website for information that will let you know where the country you live in has signed the treaty or not, and what you can do to support this action. So the first link is a very quick little action, and we'd invite you to do that now. And again, these will also be sent out in an email after today in order to give you another opportunity to sign them if you find it either impossible or difficult to click back and forth. But we hope that you will do them as soon as you're able to. So with that, we also want to give you the opportunity to meet some of your fellow concerned citizens. And so we have arranged to have some small breakout groups so that we can get to know each other and gain strength and support from the network, the relationships that we have with other peace activists, others who want to grab hold of that consciousness that Doug was talking about and use it in the best way possible to address that triple emergency. So again, the folks from World Beyond War, Rachel and Greta, are going to put us into breakout groups of maybe 7 or 8. And I have 2 questions for you. Very simple. So first is the simplest of all, introduce yourself. Just like you did in the chat, very quickly, name, where you're from, and if you want to name an association, one, and go around the circle so that everybody gets a chance to say hello, and then take a moment to go on a second round to answer this question. How have you been inspired to action for peace based on the speakers you have heard today or on other work that you know is going on around you? So first, just introduce yourself, and then everyone take a chance to tell each other how you are inspired to act for peace based on the speakers or your own inspiration that you want to bring into the group. All right, Rachel, I think we are ready for the groups. Folks, remember to unmute yourself as you go into the groups. We'll meet back here for some feedback and closing remarks at the end.
All right, so in a moment, you'll be whisked off to a breakout room. So please, on your screen, a window will pop up, say you're going to a breakout room. Please click OK or yes or whatever that is. And then at the end, you will automatically be whisked back to this larger space. You won't need to do anything. I think that's everything that people need to know. All right. Give me 1 second to get it started.
All right, folks, everyone is just rolling back in here. We didn't ask for any formal note takers or feedback from the groups, but if you were particularly inspired by something that someone else talked about, or if you have some information from your small group, or just something you wanted to share, feel free to put that in the chat. We'll certainly take a quick look at the chat before we send an email out to all of the participants in the coming days. And if there's anything that should be shared to everyone, we can make a point of that. As we said before, all of the links for the actions will also be in that email. So if you missed those earlier, you'll be able to connect through that. So now I just want to say thank you very much. I know Sophia had to take off to another in-person action today. And so we'll pass on our gratitude to her in another way. And I assume Douglas Roche is here with us yet, even though I don't, I have to flip my screens. And so.
I'm here.
You are. Thank you so much for your speaking today, for sharing your wisdom with us, and you've been able to put it so succinctly that even in a few minutes you can really give a strong impression to us. So thank you so much for being with us.
Well, I congratulate all the organizers of this Blue Scarf event. I think it was wonderful. I mean, I have not been so inspired in a long time. And in the small workout room that we just had, the comments were so coming from the heart. and people do care. And it's our job, I guess, to extend the number of people that we reach and who care and who can make their care known to governments and politicians.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It is our job to carry forward this inspiration that we've received this afternoon. So with thanks to all who have inspired, whether in the big group or in the small groups. I just wanted to let you know that this group of organizers has a tradition of hosting 2 Blue Scarf events per year. One on Earth Day in April and one on Peace Day in September. And so whether we can walk in person in Toronto or whether we'll be online next year, we don't really know yet at this point, but perhaps we'll do some sort of hybrid so that we can include everybody. But we are invited back to such a thing. So we'll be in touch by email if you have any questions for the organizers. Thanks very much. But the final thank you goes to the participants. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you again next time or in the action circles. Take care, everyone.